Conversations with the Mind podcast, where we explore consciousness through conversations with interesting people. Our mission is to engage the collective mind piece by piece to bring greater clarity of mind to our listeners locally and across the planet, and to contribute to broaden the shared experiential knowledge and wisdom of existence.
All right, folks, welcome back to Conversations with the Mind. I'm your host, Shane Master, and today we're here with a very special guest, Sara Gael. How are you?
I am doing well today. It's a beautiful sunny day in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah, so we're recording this on a Friday, and before we jumped on here, you were like, thank goodness it's Friday, which tells me that you've had a stressful week, but if people are watching this on YouTube, you look very calm and peaceful today in your space. So, so I hope you're doing okay.
Thank you. Yes, I am.
So the first question that I always ask my guests is the only real structured question that I have, which is that the podcast name is Conversations with the Mind. And I'm wondering, when you hear that phrase, what comes to your mind? How do you pick that apart? What sort of visions or anything comes to mind when I say the phrase Conversations with the Mind? What does that mean to you?
The first thing that emerges for me is the relationship that we have with our mind and the nature and quality of that relationship. And I think of my work as a therapist and as a healer, and the dynamic relationship that people have with their mind as friend or ally, as enemy or foe, and how that shifts and changes throughout the lifetime. And how, one's relationship to the mind and their that dynamic relationship with the mind is really, I think, part of what really determines our state of well-being and our state of peace and happiness, or not. And one thing that comes to mind is a teaching that I received at Naropa University, which is where I went to graduate school, around meditation, which was the puppy metaphor, which I really like for meditation. And I also apply it to other things in my life. And it's when you're meditating, you want to treat your mind like a puppy on a leash. So don't hold the leash too tight, because then your mind's going to be straining and pulling and resisting. And don't be too loose. And when you're meditating, and just let your mind absolutely go wherever. The idea with meditation is having that puppy on a leash that is not too loose and not too tight, so that there's some room to work with it, and that it's a joyous walk together, and that there's not resistance and tension, but that you're also not just letting the puppy run completely wild and just take over.
Yeah, I love that. And I was actually just going to ask you, because that's such a great way to think about our minds, is that we're in relationship with it. And so I was going to ask you, like, what is your relationship with your mind? And is that how you try and maintain, not only in a meditative space, but in an everyday context? Like, do you try and maintain that relationship as if it was a puppy?
Yeah. Wow, such a big question. So I think that consistently striving and working on developing a loving and kind relationship with my mind. So, throughout my life, I've like all of us have worked with my challenges and traumas and wellness and different levels of mental distress and mental peace. I'm a very mentally oriented person. For people who are interested in astrology and like that stuff, I'm like Aquarian all across the board. So I'm a very air sign, very mental in my mind. And my work in my life has been to be in my body and to bring my mind into balance with my heart and in my body, into an embodied being on this planet. My natural tendency is to, and I think this can be common, especially in what we might call Western world or Western civilization, which is very mentally focused and focused on the mind. So a lot of my work in my life has really been quieting my mind, bringing it into balance with the rest of my being, grounding it in this reality, in this earth realm, and bringing some of, that can look like bringing some visionary ideas actually into embodied practice. And it can also look like, definitely having to working a lot with myself through meditation and through other practices to help to balance and find peace. I'm a thinker. I think all day long. And sometimes those thoughts are really beautiful, and sometimes they're neutral, and sometimes they're distressing. And so, I think that where I'm at right now is really working every day to befriend and befriend my mind.
Well, that's definitely what you would want to do with a puppy, for sure. That's what I would want to do with a puppy. be a friend to it. But I was also trying to think, if I think for a lot of people, myself included, in the last year, 2020 was sort of a hard year for everybody. And on top of that, I mean, here in Colorado, we had really destructive fires. We've had all sorts of things. Shootings recently. We had a stabbing on my campus recently. So a lot of sort of wild behavior and things that people would normally, bring fear into their life. And so I know for me personally, like I've always suffered with, major depressive disorder at times and seasonal affective disorder, during the winter months. And this year in particular has just really hit me super, super hard with that piece. And so, and I think a lot of the listeners can probably relate. I think most people, even if they don't normally experience depression, experience something like that in this last year, with the COVID stuff going on, especially. And so I think it could be helpful for all of us, if you wouldn't mind sharing, like, how do you, when your relationship with your mind is in that moment like a destructive relationship, so your mind is working against you, and it's telling you things that may not be true, because the mind has this, sometimes it's a wonderful ability, sometimes it's not a wonderful ability, but your mind can lie to you, right? It can lie to you in so many ways, whereas like your heart or your gut brain doesn't have that ability as much. It can't cognitively, tell you a lie, but your mind can, and it does a lot of the time. And that's a big thing with depression is, your mind starts telling you, you're not good enough, or you're not gonna achieve what you're working on, or whatever, and that relationship becomes more destructive than constructive. So how do you work with those kind of relationship states when those things come on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Shane, for presencing all that is going on, some of what's going on in the world right now, as well as locally. I know we live in the same state, and it definitely, this past year, I think has tested us to some pretty extreme extents. And it's been, as a therapist and helping people navigate their experiences, as someone with most of my professional life working with crisis, when people are in extreme crisis, specifically related to psychedelics, but also otherwise and other non-ordinary states. I've really been seeing, what we've been going through is this really global crisis. And I think just like with spiritual, mystical experiences or challenging psychedelic experiences, there's an opportunity here for us to move through the other side. One of my biggest teachers and mentors, or two of my biggest teachers and mentors, are Alex Gray and Stan Groff, and have learned so much from those two men. And both of them talk about perinatal matrices, and Alex has been talking a little bit lately around seeing the experience that we're going through right now as kind of a birthing process. And when you're in the middle of birth, it can feel like a crisis. It's there's an experience and it's happening and it's big and there's nothing stopping it. So yeah, for myself, I feel like I've been trying to and working with my clients, but for myself, really trying to trust that process. Like it's really tested my trust to in a really big way, like my deep trust. Like, what is it that I trust? What is it that I find safety in? What can I connect with that has purpose and meaning and helps anchor me into a place that feels sane and well and alive. And it's a daily practice, I think that's the thing with our minds is like, or with healing in general, right? It's a daily practice. We have to continue to repeat those things over and over. So beginning of COVID, definitely like was really challenging. Lost a lot of my orientation with my daily ritual. And I think that's what happened for a lot of people, is like losing touch with like morning and evening and like a sense of compass of like the flow of the day, and especially being indoors a lot, right? And kind of disconnected from nature and disconnected from the flow of the day. So been really trying to reconnect to those rituals, my morning and nighttime rituals, whether which includes meditation, reading, journaling, yoga, movement, exercise. I do really well with structure and ritual, especially in the morning and in the evening. I think that, that really helps me through my day. And then, as a more somatically informed person and therapist, I take a really like bottom up approach, right? Like top down, bottom up approaches. So meaning that like, if my mind is not doing well, I try to come into my body and be like, what needs to be resolved here, right? What is going on? Because our mind body system, the all one system of the mind body, I think our mind is really responding to cues that the body is giving it, right? And that's what we see with trauma, with big trauma, PTSD trauma, as well as little trauma. So I think that if I notice myself in distress or discomfort or trying to avoid or distract, my first response typically is to practice, okay, what is going on in my body right now? What's my body reacting to? What does my body need? Because our bodies perceive threat from all different kinds of places and then send that message to our mind, and then that can be a loop, so I think that a lot of how I try to work with that is really attending to, okay, what am I feeling? It's tending to the emotions, right? What am I feeling? Why don't I want to feel it? Can I try a little bit more to feel a little bit more to increase my capacity for emotion. And that's really challenging, especially at a time when not only are people dealing with their own emotions and their own individual life circumstances, but we're experiencing these huge environmental and these huge social issues that we think sometimes that we're separate from, but we're not. And we're all affected and impacted. And so it's a lot running through us. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of how I'm finding myself working with it.
Yeah, when you talk about it that way, I was going back and thinking about, what was the biggest impact that COVID had on me? And I'm a pretty healthy person. My immune system is really strong because of the activities that I do. And, I constantly mix my biome with other people with jujitsu. So we're like in physical contact with multiple dozens of people on a daily basis and literally like sweating on each other. So I'm sort of like, I go by that theory that, like when you have a newborn or a little kid, like let them go play in the dirt, let them get exposed to as many things as possible and build up their immune system. And I try and do that with my own in some ways. So that part didn't really affect me as much. But during COVID, when everything started shutting down and, the world seemed to be in crisis and everyone around me seemed to be in crisis. The things that I was working on and the projects that I was doing and the schoolwork that I was doing, for a lot of those things, they seemed to lose their meaning in that context, right? So like the world was on fire, literally here in Colorado, on fire. And I was like, well, all the stuff that I'm doing doesn't really matter in the context of all the other major things that are going on around me. And so for me, like a lot of the things that I put my effort and energy into really lost a lot of meaning. And that was really difficult. And that's exactly how I felt. I felt lost. And in my body, as you're talking about tuning into the body in those moments, my mind was just like going crazy. And I was like, what is going on? And blah, blah, blah. And does any of this even matter? And I found myself tuning into my body more and really feeling lost and feeling disconnected. I felt disconnected to myself. I felt disconnected to the people around me because of the isolation and things like that. And it just felt terrible. And so and I don't think I gave this much thought at the time, but my natural process to get through that, I think, was to key into that disconnected feeling and ask myself, like, well, what are the things that I do that make me feel more connected to myself and more connected to others? And right away, it was jujitsu for me, and martial arts for me. And so luckily our gym opened back up in July. And so we were able to get back in and start to get physical with each other a bit. We still wear masks when we're training, which is a whole nother story. But, that really helped me to ground myself into my body. And even when I felt like all the mental tasks and activities and things that I was doing and putting together, even if that felt meaningless at the time, or I was just questioning, where is this thing going to go? At least I could be grounded in the moment, in my body, feel connected to myself physically through movement, and also feel genuinely connected to one other person, the person I was wrestling with in that moment. We were intimately connected in that way. And so it brought me back from a far away, dark place, and jujitsu has saved my life a number of times. And that's sort of in the jiu-jitsu world, that's sort of a cliche thing to say, is jiu-jitsu saved my life. It's like a hashtag, but it's so true. Even in early recovery from addiction, like it was jiu-jitsu and the martial arts that kept me grounded and kept me focused and kept me disciplined towards my goals, kept me away from alcohol, kept me away from poor diet, and kept me active and healthy. So the more you talk about it that way, it makes sense. And I want to say thank you for sharing that with me and with everyone else who will be listening to this. Going back to the puppy thing real quick again, you mentioned about keeping it on a leash, not too tight, not too loose, and I think that's great for that metaphor. And I was thinking, like, what are some other ways that we might want to engage with our mind as if it was a puppy that would be beneficial for us if we were to think about it that way? And some of the things that were coming to my mind were like, we want to feed our puppy, and we want to feed our puppy good food that's going to help it grow and mature in the right way, right? If we feed our puppy trash, it's not going to grow properly. It's not going to develop properly. If we don't provide it stimulation, it's going to get bored, or it's going to start going off on its own and chewing up the furniture, or we want to discipline our puppy appropriately, but not too harshly, right? You don't want to harshly discipline a puppy and make it feel scared, but you definitely want to discipline it so that it's not, going to the bathroom in the house, on the carpet, and things like that. So you want to be able to train your puppy in certain ways, just like you want to train your mind. And that's a big part of my private practice. Is I have a background in sport and performance psychology, so it's really about mental training and training the mind to work most efficiently for you in a way that benefits you rather than works against you. And we use all sorts of strategies from like Olympic athletes and professionals, leaders in every field, whether it's CEOs or astronauts or whatever. Like, they all have well-established, scientifically evidenced mental training tools. And so I try and bring those to the general population, to my clients, through that as well. And also trying to bring that into the psychedelic world a little bit too. Because if our mind is disciplined and trained, we can navigate those altered states with much greater ease than if our mind is just going everywhere. So I was trying to think of other ways that we would want to treat a puppy that would also make sense for thinking about how we treat our mind. And in those times when we feel like, this puppy is just not cooperating with me at all, what do we do? Sometimes we just need to stop being so strict and so harsh with it. And we just need to go out in the nature, in the grass, and just play with that puppy, and just let it have fun, and let it know that we love it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that we're talking puppies, because I love that with COVID, all of a sudden, all of the poor puppies of the world that were just waiting for a forever home are now finding it. You can't even find a puppy now. And in my neighborhood, I know we walk around, and I'm going to be getting a puppy soon, a few months, but just walk around, and so everyone's got their little puppies, and so cute. And I mean, I think that, that metaphor, I think what I'm noticing with people with puppies is like, it's providing them connection. It's providing them a sense of play. It's giving them a purpose and a reason to go outside. And it's giving them love in a time where people have felt so isolated. And so I think it's really beautiful, that people are adopting all of these puppies. And I think that, that would be the other thing that I would, add is love. Is we're so harsh with ourselves. We can be so adversarial to our minds. And so I think that for me, it's like mental training, and the work that you do, and in different forms of mental training kind of throughout the centuries. And I think I have background in Buddhism and went to Naropa. And so a lot of my thinking often goes to non-dualism and to meditation. And I personally, in my own personal spiritual practice, feel like it's really important to maintain a balance between that mental training and I think we already spoke this a bit, but the heart-centered body. And I think that's what you're speaking to definitely with jujitsu, because I think that it is possible to just train your mind through, say, meditation, right? And a lot of people will report this who have been long-term meditators for many, many years, where if you focus too much on the mind, just on training it and just on discipline, right? Then sometimes you're also not taking into account the feelings and the emotions and the body. And so I really think that in spiritual traditions, I think that we're seeing a shift. I'm seeing a shift in a lot of people where people are trying to step into more of a balance where there's the mental discipline practices combined with also some deep emotional work, which includes addressing your shadow and addressing your trauma, right? And because meditation, if used one way, can be a great tool to spiritual bypass everything that's going on. A lot of people have successfully used meditation to completely override their physical and emotional experience, so much that they're not even in touch with what they're feeling or what's happening, right? So I think I think there's a real balance needed, and big fan of ways and tools in which we can train. And kind of back to the puppy piece, it's like there are ways to train puppies that are probably more helpful or useful than others.
Well, yeah, and it's super similar to how you train your human mind too. It's a classical conditioning model with a puppy, and I learned this from a dog trainer. But it's way more effective to train a puppy to do what you want them to do and use reward systems to give them rewards when they do what you want, rather than a punishment system or a negative reinforcement. And same thing with humans. Like, we respond way better to positive reinforcement around desired behaviors than negative reinforcement. But I don't know, maybe it's our culture, but we're just drawn to a lot of negative ways of doing things, negative mindsets, negative parenting, things like that. So that's interesting. I tend to think of the mind as a tool, and I used to think that the mind and consciousness were one thing, but now I'm starting to come into an understanding that consciousness is this much bigger and broader thing. If it's a thing at all, and that the mind is actually just a tool under the umbrella of consciousness that we can use to experience consciousness in certain ways, right? And we can fine tune that tool however we want, to experience consciousness however we wish. And so I'm interested, separating mind and consciousness a bit. How did you first get interested in consciousness as a thing? Obviously, you're a therapist like me, and so we're like fascinated. At least I am. I'm fascinated by consciousness and the human mind and how they interact, and how they're malleable. And you were talking about, you were hinting a little bit at like rigid mindsets versus flexible mindsets. When you're talking about spirituality and spiritual traditions, and being too focused on the mind, right? And mental training can put us in these rigid mindsets where we're bound to just snap. But if we remain flexible and we can travel between our body and our mind, and travel when it's needed, we can remain flexible like a tree bending in the wind, so that we're not going to snap. But I'm curious, how did you first get interested in consciousness? Like, what sparked that interest in you? Because not everyone even cares about their mind or cares to think about consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like, as you said that last sentence, I thought of like kind of when we talk about consciousness and material, right? Like, if we're going to just talk about that spectrum or that binary for a moment, of like the material world, and then there's consciousness. That I think that a lot of, whatever we want to call it, the matrix, or the thing that we're plugged into, that we're trying to wake up from. Some of us are trying to, aware, like, oh, something's going on here, and I might not have the full story of what's actually happening, right? And I think a lot of people are really focused on the material world, and I think that that's, I mean, I can could do a whole podcast just on ancestral work and kind of how we've gotten to this place, but or some thoughts on how we might have gotten to this place that we're in right now. But in terms of your question, yeah, I think that so some of it was through pain. I think we wake up a lot through pain. We can. That's one path to awakening. When I say awakening, just right, becoming more aware, becoming more conscious of ourselves, of others, of the planet, of something beyond our little ego. So I think that sometimes pain wakes us up, sometimes beauty wakes us up, sometimes both. I think in my life, it was a combination of both, definitely. Early on, more of the pain side, seeing my family. I come from a family that an ancestral long line of addiction. And I think ancestry is actually, for me, it's really important to bring into the conversation of consciousness, because our ancestry, our lineage carries a consciousness, right? And so my particular ancestry, I'm multiracial, and my white presenting, obviously, and I grew up in New Mexico, in northern New Mexico, and on my matrilineal side, my father's European, Croatian, and then on my matrilineal side, a combination. So we're Hispanic, so a confluence of Spanish, like Spain Spanish, Mexican ancestry, and then Dene, some Native American there. So it's this interesting confluence on my matrilineal side of kind of like the confluence of people who settled in that area in New Mexico over the years, right? The Native Americans, the Spaniards, and the Mexicans. And I think that our ancestry and our lineage, we're downstream from that, and we are. I believe that we're working in this body to heal whatever is unhealed from that lineage. And so, growing up, I think a lot of what that looked like for me was, seeing a lot of pain in my family system, that I could see my parents and the generations above them not navigating well, through addiction, through problematic behaviors, also just through struggling, depression, anxiety, things like that. And so I think that for me, it was the spark early on of what's going on here, and what something doesn't feel right. And I think when we're little kids, when we're young, we have a sense of congruence, and I think we have a natural sense of what is healthy. But also, when we grow up in the ecosystem of our family, we start to just adapt to that, and that becomes the norm, right? So that becomes what we perceive maybe as healthy. So in my started struggling pretty early in my adolescence with depression, and lost my father at a very early age, from a heroin overdose. And so I just remember at a very young age, feeling this really intense pain, and feeling it in connection to my family, and just a lot of confusion of what's going on here. So I think that it was initially my interest in consciousness, came from, I'm in pain, and I don't want to be in pain anymore. So what do I have to do to not be in pain? And that took me on my journey. That took me on a spiritual path. I've always been a more spiritually oriented person, more mystically oriented person. So that's not something that I think for different people, it shows up differently. It turns on or doesn't at certain ages, so I have I know people who are, they're like, I was completely not interested in spirituality or mysticism until I was like, in my 40s or my 30s. And for me, I just always heard things, saw things, was aware of things that, other people were just like, what? So I think I always had a sense of something bigger and a deeper connection. I always had a sense of deep connection to the earth and to nature and to the planet. And that's how I received a lot of my support growing up. I think that, you say that, jujitsu saved your life. And for me, I think nature and nature connection saved my life. And so, and then, to the beauty, like that's what that part was too, was really connecting deeply with nature and starting to recognize that I could entrain with, and of course I didn't have the language for this at the age, but that I could entrain with nature, and that when I was within nature, I was connecting to something that felt well, that felt healthy, and that I could tell felt distinct and different than what I could feel happening in my family system. So that took me on a journey of environmental studies and wilderness therapy, and I spent many, many years working in the wilderness, in the environment, teaching about environmental issues, as well as just helping people connect to the natural world, leading vision quests, and doing therapeutic backpacking work out in nature. So yeah.
Yeah, I love how you talk about how both pain and beauty can be teachers for consciousness, and in my experience within my own self, and then also within my experience as a therapist, and again, maybe it's a cultural thing, but I tend to, for a long time, most of my life so far, I thought that learning through pain was the only way, or was the best way, the best way to remember, that something is important, was through pain. It seemed like things that I learned through beauty were quickly forgotten. But I had a really good friend tell me one time, she said, whenever you ask for healing or understanding or something, whether it's through prayer or you're just talking to yourself or through someone else, that it's okay to ask to gain those teachings through joy rather than through pain, And I think I wasn't being specific in my asking. I was just like, hey, teach me this about myself, and then I tear a ligament or something, or teach me this, and then someone, I'd lose someone in my family. But nowadays, whenever I ask, the universe, or the field of consciousness that we're all plugged into, and I believe that consciousness these days includes the material too, it includes the material and all the immaterial and everything. Whenever I'm talking to that field, to that stream, it already knows what I'm going through, but I feel like verbalizing it helps bring it or manifest it more into our life. I always ask, like, teach me through joy, show me my shadow self and help me through that, but let's do that through joy. You don't have to teach me through pain. I've already had enough pain in my life. And so, and it works, asking to be taught through a different methodology or a different mode, it really does work, and it really does help. So I love that you were talking about, that we can learn through different ways like that. You were talking about being spiritually inclined for most of your life, and I'm the exact opposite. Most of my early years, I was an atheist. I was not raised in a religious family. My mom always, gave my brother and I the freedom to explore whatever we wanted, and I'm so thankful that she was like that. But I witnessed, her having drum circles at my house and meditations with her friends and things like that. And I was just not interested. I was like, this is not gonna help you at all. It's not doing anything, Me being my rebellious teenage self, I became an anarchist, or I became an atheist or an agnostic, take your pick of those. And I, like science was my God. Nothing was real unless you could prove it to me. Um, and I stayed that way. I was so shielded. I had the blinders on for sure, like self-imposed blinders. And I can remember I was in my mid-teens. I think I was 15 when I went to military school. And well, first, like when I was a kid, my mom would make us go to Sunday school, just because I think she needed a break from us. And I hated it. I hated every moment of it. And then when I was 15 and I was at military school, they forced us to go to church twice a week. We were wearing like these full wool uniforms, and it was the worst experience ever. So that further reinforced my desire not to be spiritual. But then when I was 16, I had my first ever drug experience at all, like any drug, before alcohol, before tobacco, before anything. I tried LSD while I was at military school. And that experience like blew my mind open and showed me that there is so much to this world and to this universe and to this human experience that I have no idea about. And that is not, the things that I saw and the things that I experienced, I was like, there's no way science could even touch this. And yet it's so real to me. There's something here. And so from that moment on, I was forever changed. I started reading about Buddhism. I started getting into meditation. I started, exploring my mind and exploring consciousness. So I came to it at a later age than you did. I think it's awesome that you've always been like that. I'm sure I have a lot to learn from you as a person in that regard. But that brings me to, psychedelics, and a lot of your work has been in psychedelics. And so what got you first interested in the vast, wonderful world of psychedelics? Like before you even started with maps, like what got you interested in these magic molecules?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing your story. I get chills every time I hear about someone who, had an experience like that just turned things on and everything was different after that, right? And I think that for a lot of people, there's something in your life, right? There's like something that happened, and like I was who I was before, and then I was who I was after. And I love when psychedelics are, when I hear stories when psychedelics were the catalyst for that. I love that you were in military school. That's a great story. So thank you for sharing that about yourself and about that experience. And definitely, even though for myself, even though I felt that there was a presence, I was very interested early on in like Taoism. I remember when I was like real young, like 10, 9, reading books on like Wiccan stuff and paganism and like getting tarot cards and just being like really interested in that. But I still, even though that was a part of my awareness, I definitely have had the experiences where it was like, okay, I was who I was before. And then I was somebody totally different after. And, a few of those peak experiences in my life, Burning Man being one of them. First time I went was in 2012. And it's like, okay, fine. I'm a cliche. Burning Man changed my life.
I still want to go to that.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. So with psychedelics, growing up, substances, so small town, northern New Mexico, substances were really just generally substances were part of the culture. And I think for a lot of people who grew up in small towns, maybe not all, but I think that there can be small towns are interesting in that kids can get bored. And So definitely a lot of, exploration at a younger age. I think that there was more exposure. I think my family as well, and some of the drug use, substance use that was happening in my family. My father smoked cannabis, and so I saw that regularly. And I think so that was kind of like my first awareness of like, oh, that's a drug, that's like not alcohol, that like you smoke it. And I remember he used to feed me the seeds. He was picking through it, and I was like, I don't know what this is. So remember kind of just seeing bongs at a very young age and being like, what's going on there? So I think I was exposed to it at a very early age. And I've just always been just really curious about trying new things and just very like an adventurous spirit. And so, kind of started exploring some of that territory early on when I was in high school, pretty young. Don't necessarily, recommend that. I think that I do kind of agree in some ways with the philosophy that it's best to have an ego before you dissolve it, so that you have something to come back to. So I think that, I just, from an early age, was very curious in exploration, and the DARE program did not work on me. I know for some it worked wonders, but yeah, it totally failed that class. So yeah, I think there was just like an inclination of like there's something here. And I think that some, especially during teenage years, I think that there can be two primary categories of experience as a teenager, depending on our childhood, and one can be more conformity, and the other can be more rebellion. I'm being very like simplistic here, but I was definitely like a rebel, and so I think if you told me I couldn't do something, then I would want to do it. So, fast forward like many years into grad school, and going to Naropa, and with some of my fellow students and colleagues there at Naropa, we kind of found each other. Like I kind of lost touch with the psychedelic world in my undergrad. Like I didn't explore with psychedelics. I went to undergrad in Hawaii, which I think was just so psychedelic in and of itself that like I didn't have any experiences. And so when I went to grad school, found some people who were really interested in the therapeutic potential of psychedelics. And I was like, wait, what? Because for me, psychedelics and my relationship to that when I was younger would always just been like, it's just another drug. It's just another way to get messed up, And I had some very profound experiences when I was younger, some incredibly profound experiences, but I had not made the connection. No surprise there because of the social stigma and downplay of how much psychedelics have contributed to our society, that it took until grad school for me to actually be like, wait, what? There was research going on around psychedelics in the 60s. Wait, what? This wasn't just like some things that like my high school friends and I were doing, So when I met some kindred spirits in grad school and realized that, learned about the work that MAPS was doing, and realized that there had been that there was research and work being put into studying psychedelics, treating people with psychedelics. It was an epiphany for me, because I thought about all of those experiences that I had had when I was younger. And I was like, oh, that there was something happening there that wasn't just doing drugs. There was something I was experiencing. And so it just clicked. And so, yeah, some of my colleagues at school and I helped co-founded a group called NAPS, the Naropa Alliance for Psychedelic Studies. And when I graduated, I went to Burning Man, and around that time met Rick Doblin and the rest of the MAPS crew, and that was the beginning of that.
Yeah, I've been to a couple of NAPS meetings. It's still going strong. like that group a lot. Do you have like a favorite altered states experience that was either like really formative for you? Like for me, like that first experience on LSD was one of the most formative experiences for me. It completely changed. I mean, I'm still that person before that went to military school, still very disciplined, and but it completely shifted who I was as far as like being a rigid person to now a more flexible person, or seeing through a lot of the social conditioning that I was taking a part of. You know, being at a military school and people telling you and giving you orders and making you do things. I saw through that for the first time and was forever changed by that. And now I question all authority all the time. And it's such a wonderful thing to do. But was there any, was there a favorite altered state experience that you wouldn't mind sharing with the audience that shaped you in some way?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that it's interesting because the one I'm thinking of is like definitely directly related to the work that I've created a career around with psychedelic peer support and harm reduction at festivals. So actually at my first festival, which was Bonnaroo, I drove from New Mexico to Tennessee, and Tool is my like favorite band of all time. I mean, Led Zeppelin, Tool, but yeah, awesome. So family, yeah, huge Tool fan. And I went to they headlined at Bonnaroo, and I had an experience that was stronger than expected, more amplified than I had planned. And so was in a very non-dual, very expanded state where, I was not really connected to my ego. And it was a really beautiful experience. The show itself was amazing to get to experience. That music is just amazing in that state. And so at that point in my life, I hadn't decided to become a therapist. I didn't know I was going to become a therapist. My plan was to continue to work in environmental work and conservation. And this show was, it's interesting how when you're in those states, something that's apparently so small, right, feels so profound. And I was already I think at that point, I was having these recognitions. I was in undergrad, I was in college, and I was having these recognitions. I was studying environmental science. And I was like, I'm going to save the planet, and I'm going to do all these things in conservation, and I'm going to, become an environmentalist well, I already was an environmentalist, but I'm going to become an environmental activist and warrior. And like big props, first off, to people who are doing that work in conservation and working to diligently to heal this planet. But for me, there was a point where I had this recognition, and it was related to this Tool show, because kind of everyone left after the show, and there was just piles of water bottles and piles of trash. And if I had been in just an ordinary state, just been like, oh, that sucks. People are just leaving their trash around. But for me, in the state that I was in, it was a microcosm of the whole world, right? It was just everyone's throwing their trash on the ground. And that's the norm that can be the norm at kind of bigger festivals sometimes, really, unfortunately, right? If people just throw things on the ground. But in that moment, I really saw it as like, oh, this is actually what people are doing. And it clicked to me that there is no away, that when we throw something away in the trash, it doesn't actually go away. And that really throwing a bottle on the ground oftentimes, even when we try to like recycle, things often don't get recycled and end up in landfills anyway. So in that moment, I was really seeing it as this microcosm of this bigger issue of people not taking responsibility for their own waste, not taking responsibility as consumers, and just like consuming the earth, and then just essentially just defecating on it, just leaving refuse everywhere. And so that show, and that moment, that experience, especially after seeing the beauty of Tool and what they bring and the healing energy that they are just transmitting and putting out there in the world, and then having that contrast kind of experience with seeing all of that, that was pivotal in my decision to transition from working in environmental work to working with people's consciousness, because I thought, you can tell people to recycle all day long. You can tell people to drive their hybrid cars all day long. But if you don't address consciousness, and if you don't address people's disconnection to the planet and to each other and to one another, then people might go through the motions, but they're not actually going to develop a deeper relationship to the planet and to each other. And to their fellow humans. And I see that as an extension. I see that, like right now we're really in this crisis of a social justice crisis. We have been for a long, long time, but that's one of the things that's up in our face that we can't look away from, that we're really being forced to look at. And I don't see those as separate. I see how we engage and treat each other as human beings, and the injustices that are playing out, and on many levels in that regard. I see the planet as an extension of that, right? Like we treat the planet in a similar way, where it's just people are disposable, the planet's disposable. It's there for our selfish purposes, and we will do whatever we need to make sure that we are on top, that we have what we need, that we're taken care of, and screw everybody else, right? So I see that as kind of the same mentality. So that was a big shift for me in, I can't, as a person, work my whole life to try to save one species of animal. And once again, bless and thank you for those who do. But for me, I was like, I needed to focus on what is causing this disconnection, and focus on healing and on helping heal that. And I see them as one in the same. I mean, environmental work and healing and therapeutic work are very similar. They're both, I think, healing modalities in their own right. But for me, I need tangible results. I need to be looking at somebody, see somebody, go, aha, oh my goodness, I'm not the center of the universe, and everything doesn't just revolve around me and my little like corner of privilege. All right, like that's what lights me up. So long story about a very peak experience in my life.
That's great. Man, I had so many thoughts during what you were sharing that I don't really know where to begin. I think, getting to the root cause of environmental destruction and disconnection from others and disconnection from ourselves, I think that's the target that we should be aiming for, is that connection, right? That is going to end up, snowballing and then healing the planet, rather than just trying to heal the surface level issue. It's like the destruction of the planet is simply a symptom of the disconnection that we have. And it makes me want to call up Rick Doblin and tell him to go give everybody on the planet some MDMA for a day and see what happens. That would be interesting.
He's working on it.
Yeah, that's great. And I had no idea that you were a Tool fan. Tool has always been one of my favorite, probably my top favorite band of all time. I've been to a ton of shows, and I find that, all their albums, but especially I really like their new album, Fear Inoculum. Listening to that on sound canceling headphones when I'm in an altered state, oh my goodness, those guys are on a different level. They bend your consciousness as you're listening to them, and It's magical. It's so amazing. I'd love to go to a show with you sometime. When they start touring again.
Let's do Red Rocks. Yeah, I actually had tickets right before. I saw them in Denver right before COVID hit, and then I had tickets to go see them in Portland and Seattle. And the night before, it was when we were still trying to figure out what's going on, and like the airlines hadn't shut down, and people were like, "Wait, what's happening here?" And the night before the show in Portland, they canceled my flight, and they ended up playing that show that last night, but then they canceled the next night in Seattle. So yeah, let's go Red Rocks next time.
Yeah. Well, if we hear that they're going to tour. And on a related note, are you a fan of Pucifer?
I am.
Yeah, good. Their new album, Existential Reckoning, is also one of my all-time favorites now to, when I'm in an altered state on anything, whether I'm, whatever, dancing and I'm in an altered state, putting that album on from start to finish is one of my favorite dancing albums. It's like I think of like Perfect Circle as Tool light, and Pucifer is a Tool that you can dance to. So they're all related in my mind, but that's awesome that you are a Tool fan. I had no idea. I was hoping that you could speak to your MAPS career, your career with the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. That's actually, I met you right after a MAPS conference. We had just finished the big conference in Oakland, and I was on my flight home, and guess who sat right next to me on the flight home? It was Sara Gael. And so you and I talked the whole time. I was planning on listening to my music and zoning out and rehashing the conference, but you and I got into a pretty deep conversation. I think you saw me carrying an Alex Gray poster that I had him sign, and you're like, "Oh, that's the Albert Hoffman poster. That's one of my favorites," and that really kicked it off. And I was wondering if you could tell, because I don't even think I know this story, but how did you get involved with MAPS in the first place? How did you get started with them? I know that you have an illustrious career with them as a harm reduction specialist, and you're moving on to, you're still involved with the harm reduction stuff, but you're also expanding into other areas. So could you share with me and with the audience, like how you got started with MAPS and how that career evolved?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm just thinking back to the plane, and yeah, it feels like it's forever ago, but yeah, that was special. So in 2012, I graduated from Naropa with my degree was in transpersonal counseling psychology with a wilderness therapy focus. And I had helped to get NAPS off the ground with my fellow students there at Naropa. And while we were, so NAPS started in 2012, and we held a symposium. And we invited to that symposium Marcela Otalera. And she was doing a presentation at the symposium on MDMA assisted psychotherapy. And at that time, I was less familiar with MDMA than I was with other classical psychedelics. And I immediately resonated with her and listened to her presentation on trauma and the uses of the study, which at that point we were just beginning phase 2 of the study, and she was working on a site here in Boulder. And so I met her, and we started a friendship, and got to know her. She's an amazing woman, mentor, elder in this community, holds so much wisdom. She's been one of the main trainers in the MDMA assisted psychotherapy protocol. So, in the past decade that we've had kind of phase 2 and phase 3 of the MDMA assisted psychotherapy work, she's been working as the principal investigator for the Boulder study. She's been working as a lead trainer there've been 4 main trainers, so Michael and Annie Midhofer, and then Marcelo Tolera and Bruce. And so I met her, she became a mentor, and she asked me to come with her to Burning Man. She was going with her friend Rick Doblin, and who she had known for about 30 years, to go do psychedelic harm reduction at Burning Man. And I was like, I don't even know what that is, but I know what Burning Man is, and I've always wanted to go there, but had never been able to go because of school, blah, blah, blah. So I went to Burning Man. And at that year, Zendo Project, so MAPS has been doing some work in psychedelic peer support and harm reduction since early 2000s. So for about 20 years, they've helped provide services and staff at different festivals all around the world, and events, including Burning Man. But in 2012, it was like the official launch of like the actual, what was called the Zendo Project. And so it's called the Zendo Project because we have this beautiful repurposed cardboard yurt that was donated to us by a group of Zen Buddhists who had built the yurt and used it for the purposes of meditation at Burning Man. And so when they were done with that, they gifted it to us. And so that's where our namesake comes from with Zendo Project. Also because sitting for someone can be definitely a form of meditation. So I learned that year in 2012, and sat for people and learned what that was to be a sitter and to provide support, and was just kind of thrown into it. And at that point I was a therapist, so I had skills that would help me, but I had no idea what that was going to look like. And it was just so wild to see people having these huge opening experiences, but not having any container to hold it, and just ending up having a really difficult time or freaking out, or people bringing, not knowing their friends, not knowing what to do with them. So that was such an eye-opening experience, and being able to support people in that place was just so rewarding. And at that time, the harm reduction department was barely even becoming a department at that point. It was like just the Zendo Project. And at that time, Lene Ponte was directing. She's the former director. And so got to know her, and then her and I developed a close relationship. And then from there, she asked me to come back and join her to help to provide services at a few different events the following year in 2013. And so I started working with MAPS in that capacity in 2013, really worked as the training and education coordinator for the Zendo Project. So helped develop and train the volunteers. And then in 2016, Lene stepped out of the organization, and I became the director of the department in 2016. And I did that till 2020. Simultaneously in 2013, I started working as on the study, on the MDMA PTSD study. So I've been doing both for the past 9 years, and that's been a real gift to be able to do both the clinical work and work in that capacity as a therapist, and also the wild west of psychedelic peer support and harm reduction. So yeah, I'm still working with MAPS. I still work as a therapist on the study, and I transitioned from the director position last year to really, it was just time for something new, and just working on focusing on making space for new arising, and doing crisis work for a long time. I think it has a shelf life. I think there's a certain point where it's like, okay. So transitioned out of that position, but still helping to support as harm reduction officer with strategy and training and education, and sharing our message, and doing a lot of public speaking and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's been I don't know where I would, my resume is all psychedelic. If I would ever try to find a job in a non-psychedelic world, I don't know what that would look like. But luckily, this is what I want to do, and plan to continue to do work in this beautiful world of psychedelic healing and therapy and education. And we're at such a time right now with this work where it's just really blossoming, and it's amazing. It's a lot to see it start to become more mainstream, and there's a lot of beauty, and we're talking beauty pain. There's some pain points that we're navigating through the psychedelic renaissance as well, and navigating how to do this and integrate psychedelics responsibly and safely into society, which is some of the work that you and I are doing together in Denver on the psilocybin decrim policy review panel.
Yeah. Who would have thought that going to Burning Man would end up in a career or a job? Most people don't go to Burning Man to find a job. You do that to get away from work. No, and that's interesting. You said your whole resume is psychedelics and you don't know what it would be like. I'm actually reaching a point in my PhD studies where, I'll be done with coursework and I'll be transitioning into my dissertation. And so I need to find another way to help pay my bills and pay my rent and things like that, because graduate research positions aren't available if you're in dissertation phase. And so recently I've been applying for local mental health positions, and these are positions that I've held in the past. Like, I've been a therapist at these nonprofit community mental health centers, but my resume has changed since I worked there, and I have, of course, on my resume, I try and be as authentic as possible these days, because it feels really good to me to be out of the psychedelic closet in that way. And so I put on my resume, that I'm working on this Denver psilocybin panel, that, I've been through ketamine assisted psychotherapy trainings, and I've been through, and I put that on my resume. And I recently just had, 3 interviews in the last couple of weeks for these mental health positions that I've already held in the past. And the first thing that each place brought up and asked was like, hey, like, I see this psychedelic stuff on your resume, like, what's that all about? And how are you planning on keeping that separate from our abstinence models that we teach in our facility? And like, I have the clinical skills and the boundary setting and personal boundary setting to be able to do that. But it was amazing to me how close-minded still some of these agencies are around. Even, in the last few years, the psychedelic stuff has been on 60 Minutes, it's been on NPR, it's been in the New York Times, it's been all over popular culture, and still they're so close-minded to it. And I think that it was those psychedelic things on my resume that probably cost me those opportunities for work. And I don't regret putting them on my resume. That might just be the universe trying to nudge me more in the direction of psychedelic work, saying like, you need to get out of standard community mental health and start applying for more psychedelically oriented, or at least psychedelic informed or open type of positions, whether that be at a clinic or at a particular organization or something like that. So I'm just trying to take it that way. It's like, it's it's probably a sign that I'm past that part in my career where I'm only doing Western psychotherapy, and I'm moving more into what I really want to be doing, which is the psychedelic therapy and psychedelic informed research and things like that. So it's interesting that you brought that up. I'm wondering, do you have, and I'm sure you get this question all the time, do you have any particular stories or experiences around harm reduction that just stand out to you as like, whoa, that was a crazy experience, or or you know, I'm sure you can maintain whoever's confidentiality it is who had the experience, but were there any experiences you had where it was just like, man, that was crazy, or that was draining, or that was so healing, or something big? Because some people don't even know what harm reduction is, and how off the wall it can get, you know.
Mhm. Yeah. It's interesting. It's like that question over the years has shifted for me, where it's like it's become this kind of meta question where, when people write books and they're like memoirs and they write about like real people, but then they like remove their names, or sometimes they like combine characteristics of certain people and put them together so that all the details are. I feel like that's just kind of happened for me naturally, because after doing this for 9 years, it's like I remember the distinct experiences, but also it becomes this more archetypal kind of experience of like the human journey. And I think that, for me, it also, and I don't know how it is for the listener, but for me, I feel like it's actually even more powerful when I talk about it rather than just like the one distinct experience. It's like, I think that what we're seeing often with people's experience is, if you are in a clinical trial, or you're in an ayahuasca ceremony, or you're doing ketamine therapy, if you're doing therapeutic, clinical, ceremonial, psychedelic use, there's a container to hold you. Those containers vary in quality from container to container. And, if for the listeners out there who are looking for containers, do your research, learn about those containers, learn about those individuals who are holding those spaces, talk to people who have sat with those people, like do your research. There's a term going around lately, Craigslist shaman, which I think is a really good term of, just beware the Craigslist shaman. And really, this is your mind. As we've been talking about today, care for your mind, and part of caring for your mind means, making sure that it is in good hands. So a little bit of a rabbit hole over there, but I think that what we're seeing is with Zendo Project and other organizations that provide this type of support in these so-called recreational spaces. I like the term recreational, because I think we can recreate what it means to be recreational. And so there's not often that container, and people have all kinds of different intentions, and they may be expecting that they're going to take a psychedelic. And some people in festivals and events are like, I'm going to take the psychedelic because I need to do some really deep healing around my childhood trauma. Like that actually happens. People do that. Majority of people, anecdotally, I believe, from what I've seen, are like, woo, I'm taking something, kind of like what I was talking about in high school. It's like, all right, I'm just exploring, I'm exploring, I'm wanting to connect, I'm wanting to have fun, I'm wanting to deepen my relationships, I'm wanting to, all kinds of reasons. There's many reasons why people choose to take psychedelics. But typically, like, it's not like I want to just unpack all of my trauma here on the dance floor. It just happens. And that's why psychedelics hold so much promise for therapy, is because they do bring that stuff up. So, I think that what we see in kind of the archetypal arc of so many people's experience is touching into some deep existential place, often related to aloneness or deep existential confusion around being a human being. They hit some sort of place that contains sometimes grief, sometimes pain, sometimes extreme ecstasy, right? I like to say with difficult experiences, not everyone who comes to the Zendo is having a difficult experience. Some people are sometimes people come to the Zendo because people are having a difficult experience with them, right? Those are those really big transcendent states where person has all their clothes off, they're running around naked, trying to take over the DJ booth, right? So I wouldn't necessarily say that that person's having a difficult experience, but they're having an experience that is definitely disruptive to others around them. And so, so people hit this place where they're having a challenge, they're having an existential crisis, they're having a relational issue, but it's like it comes down to these deep levels of grief and pain that we're all working with, that we were talking about at the beginning of the call. And they feel alone, and they feel like they don't have anybody, and their friends don't know what to do with them. And so they come to us, and we provide sitters who we work with and train prior to the festival. And really, I think it's a lot of unlearning. Like, it's a training, but there's also a lot of untraining. It's just sitting is, for people who want to learn more, they'll, go to Zendo Project and look at the website and explore resources about sitting. But really, at the core of it, I think it's learning to be human. It's learning to be present with another human being in their pain or in their ecstasy and joy, and to stay with the experience with them and to not turn away. And I think everyone's, when people come to the Zendo, that's the gift that they're receiving, and the gift that the volunteers are offering, because this is a volunteer run organization, is, I'm offering to be present with you. And of course, there's a myriad of other techniques and skills and all kinds of ways in which we help to teach people how to work with these experiences. But at the core, I think when people come into the space, they have an opportunity to really be witnessed and seen and reflected. And that is uncommon. That is a rare experience. They're also having experience where they're met with compassion, even if they're saying weird things, right? Or what might be perceived as weird. So and there's also a community healing aspect to it too. It feels kind of ceremonial because people come into the space and it's relatively private. They're with their sitter, but it's a space. It's a big space, more like it's a yurt. So there's a communal aspect to the healing too, where people they're in a space where they're kind of witnessing each other, right? Like everyone has their little private little area, but there's an element of witnessing. So I see it as like when we do this work, that people are coming to these transformational festivals for all kinds of reasons, wanting to connect, wanting to explore themselves, wanting to explore their consciousness. They choose to explore their consciousness in a certain way, bump up against those things that we find there, and have an opportunity to come together in community. And when they leave the space, to have an experience where they were able to be held. And the volunteers, their experience is also really powerful too. Like, it's so beautiful. I mean, the feedback that we get from the guests and the volunteers, the experiences that people have in there are like life-changing, both as guests and volunteers. And volunteers have these experiences and they're just like, oh my goodness, what a gift to be able to sit for people. And because it's peer support, and it's not mental health, it's peer support. If it's a mental health issue, we triage that up to mental health support. What that means is that you have people from all different backgrounds and all different, not just therapists. So people who normally wouldn't have the opportunity to share in that sort of human exchange, in that depth and that capacity, receive that opportunity. And so yeah, as you can probably tell, it's something I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, for sure. And I would love to. I still have not been even to a festival, um, period. But I would love to be able to go to a festival and see. Well, I have been to a festival like as a security guard in that kind of position, which is way different. Um, but I'd like to go experience a festival and go experience Burning Man and go stop into some of those harm reduction tents and just witness, the work that's being done. Because I've sat for a number of people myself, and I know what that feels like to be in that place, that position. But I want to see it done on a mass scale. With 20 or 30 people in the same room, some having huge experiences all at once, and to feel that real energy that's sort of cycloning through that tent would be amazing. So this is sort of this will probably be my last question for you, and it's not even close to the topics that we've been talking about so far. So you currently live in Boulder, correct?
I do.
Yeah, and so the listeners will know this, but there was a recent shooting at a King Soopers grocery store in Boulder, and I went to undergrad at CU Boulder, so I know the area well. I feel like part of my heart is still in Boulder. If I could live anywhere in Colorado, it would probably be there if I could afford it. Um, but for someone who's living there, and who also has ties, your heart is tied to that city, and it's such a beautiful place. What is your take on what happened recently, and how is the community responding, and um, how has it affected you personally?
Yeah, so that grocery store is my neighborhood grocery store. That's right down the street from my house, and that's where I shop. And so yeah, definitely close to home, and then close to home. And yeah, I haven't been spending a lot of time on social media. And I haven't been spending a lot of time, uh, engaging in that way. For me, when something like this happens, which unfortunately has become more and more common as time goes by, these public, these mass shootings. I have a like my immediate kind of reaction or response is it's interesting because I work in crisis, but it's like I freeze. My trauma response is freeze response, right? So I've gotten to know that. I think it's really good to get to know what your trauma response is. So do you fight? Do you flee? Do you freeze? And for me, when something like so tragic and so big like this happens, I freeze, and then I spend some time thawing, like my system thaws. And as I get older, I try to get better at not freezing, being with the feelings, being with the emotions. So, I've definitely been spending time allowing the feelings to move through me, allowing the grief to move through, and spending some time, with tears and with anger, is really trying to be with my feelings, as well as being a support for my friends who are also impacted. Yeah, and kind of some of the one bigger thing that that I'll speak to, since you asked this question that I think that I struggle with is the mental health conversation as it relates to incidents like this. And I'm gonna speak my truth here, and I think it's maybe controversial, and there's definitely people who won't agree with me. But I think one of the things that I struggle to navigate when things like this happen is the public response that emerges, that is, and we're seeing this a lot with a lot of things, we're seeing it Republican, Democrat, gun control, not, freedom, where there's this very black and white way of seeing things. And it's like people get locked into their position of like, no, it's this, no, it's this, and you think different, and so let's hate each other. And then it happens again. And then the same thing happens again. So I think one of the things that just really pisses me off about seeing this happen over and over again is that I see, and I have compassion for how people respond to things like this. I do. I'm a therapist. I have to have that. But what I mean by like pisses me off is just frustrates me that we keep running into the same pattern in how we respond, where we get into this very black, white, very two sides, and then we fight it out, and then nothing changes. And one of those nuances that I want to speak to is the nuance around mental health. And one of the things that I've one of the conversations that happens every time something like this happens is that there are people that go, hey, I think that this person may have been experiencing some mental health issues. And then there's a camp of people who say, that is excusing the behavior. And there's another thing that I hear, which is that is stigmatizing mental health. And it seems like there's those two camps, and they just keep bumping up against each other. And so I think what that really shows is it's not individual, it's a systemic perspective of how we view mental health. Because we don't have I don't believe that as a society we've developed a big enough, our mental health system is one of the many systems and institutions right now where we're seeing the deep cracks in that is crumbling before our very eyes, which thank goodness psychedelics are coming in, because I think psychedelics are going to help heal that. But there's all these institutions that we're seeing those cracks, and we're seeing them crumble, ideally crumble, but build new things in their place, new structures. So in regards to the mental health conversation as it relates to these mass shooting scenarios, these individuals, is I just want to, invite people to consider, like, to flip the script. And my invitation is somebody who commits an act like this, is somebody who actually commits this act, can you actually say, that person seems of sound mind, they seem sane, they seem mentally well and healthy? My answer would be no. So my response to that is there is a mental health issue going on here. Yes, that doesn't, just because there's a mental health issue doesn't mean that there's also, that we need to have conversations around guns in our country. Doesn't mean that it's a excuse, and that, because there was mental health stuff, that it means that they get let off the hook, right? So I think that what I'm calling for in speaking this is, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak it, is a bigger perception or bigger perspective around how we view mental health. And that I'm hoping that in the coming years we can start to say, yes, this is a symptom of an illness, of a mentally unwell, not just individual, but system that continues to breed this kind of situation. See it from a more transpersonal perspective, like this isn't just one person, this is also a systemic issue, and address it as such. And so that's my hope, that in the coming years, we'll start to be able to have more of a conversation around how to address this on a more holistic, systemic level that touches on all of the different areas, mainly mental health and gun laws and guns.
Here. Yeah, I couldn't have said it any other way, any better. So thank you for sharing that. And I feel like I could talk to you all day, but unfortunately, time has run out for us today. So I want to thank you again for coming to the show and sharing with me a bit more about you. I feel like I know you so much better after this 2-hour conversation, and thank you for sharing what you have with the audience. I know that they're going to be grateful as I am too. So just want to say I appreciate you and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Shane. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Okay.
Conversations with the Mind podcast is sponsored by mindops.com. You can find us at www.mind-ops.com. We're an eclectic counseling company providing mental health and mental performance services to individuals, small and large groups, teams, businesses, military, through face-to-face sessions or at a distance using phone or confidential video chat apps. We bring a unique Buddhist Western lens and specialize in general psychotherapy for all mental difficulties, sport and performance psychology for performance enhancement, addiction counseling for any maladaptive or destructive habits, and psychedelic integration therapy to make the most from your visionary medicine work. We are available as well for corporate workshops to address the needs of your employees' wellness.